Welcome to our podcast series, 30 Minutes with Brkthru, where we discuss important topics and emerging trends in the world of digital media, advertising, and marketing, with a little help from the digital media pros at Brkthru. In this episode, we're talking about streaming sports and the 159 million live sports viewers across the United States. That's a big audience, and one that many advertisers and their agencies hope to reach. Last year, 95 of the 100 most watched TV programs were live sports. Joining us to talk about streaming sports opportunities today are Brkthru President Jonathan Mellinger and Vice President of Sales Development, Nathan Foster. Take it away, Jonathan and Nathan.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Wow, this is fantastic, and excited to be here to kick this thing off, Jonathan.
Likewise. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. No, really looking forward to this conversation. I think any of us that work in the digital media space, it's becoming ever apparent that live sports is entering into our world in a more meaningful way. I mean, for years and years, it's been on the TV side pretty specifically, but over the last 18 months, I don't know if you have any thoughts, but it feels like we've seen a pretty dynamic shift of live sports into the streaming side, and more so a larger commitment from the teams themselves, the leagues themselves, to bring that into the streaming space.
Yeah, well, you and I have been talking about this together every week, almost a year, because, and I get almost giddy about this because got us to this conversation. I think probably the writer's strike, really for us, for me, highlighted the opportunity that live sports brings when you're in a world of where there's a lack of content, right. And it really emphasizes how much people really pay attention to it. The writer's strike ended, but other things happened in the world that kind of brought this to the fore of our regular conversation, which was the whole bankruptcy of Diamond Sports.
Yep.
Because what does that do? What was the result of that? Ends up that a lot of local and regional advertisers all of a sudden have no place or not sure where they're going to place their advertising dollars. And as part of that bankruptcy, it looked like some teams were building their own direct-to-consumer app, right. Which means eventually they're going to need to have advertising there. So it creates this world of uncertainty for local and regional advertisers, which is what we talk about every day, but also kind of falls into our lap is, what can we do here?
Right.
What does our constituents or our clients need? And how do we answer that when there's so much uncertainty around the regional sports nets and their advertising dollars, and what will they do? Maybe not so much today, but thinking out 18 to 24 months, where does this market go?
There's a lot there, right? One of the things that you keyed on, and I think when we first started having this conversation, the writer's strike, that kind of prompted a lot of this shift, it feels like. And one of the stats I read recently that really floored me, and as you know, my background is in TV, right? I started my ad career in on the television side as a seller. You'd see top 100 shows, and you'd see live sports filtered into that conversation, but you'd always see the Grammys, Scott Van Pelt, some of these really high-profile shows, America's Got Talent, others, into that mix. 2023 felt like a pretty seismic shift in that footprint, and I think a lot of it has to do with that writer's strike. And we just saw Nielsen produce the metrics. The top 100 shows on TV last year, 95 of them were live sports events. Do you think that's a reflection of the writer's strike, or do you think that's more of a promotion of the networks themselves and really elevating live sports because that's where the consumer eyeballs are at more so than anything?
I think the desire for drama.
Okay.
The human condition.
Like live sports, it's a perfect drama.
And now there's so many different opportunities. It was not, there's UFC, there's pro basketball, and there's a way that the production value, I think, over the last decade has just increased. The talent level has increased. All said, that just makes that product more valuable for an advertiser. And I think that's how they get there, where the eyeballs are, and where the diversity of those events are, is critical for us to understand, both right. for our day-to-day job, but also how to still use that sort of this changing landscape to effectively still help our clients achieve their marketing objectives through this medium.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the things that I think there's this concept in advertising a lot of times where it's this or that, right? And we don't oftentimes think of the combined efforts of how platforms can engage or interact with each other. And especially it feels like it's more apparent as we have more conversation in the marketplace on the streaming side, specific to live sports. We'll often encounter, hey, we're already planned out, we've got budget allocated to our TV campaigns. I don't think that the concept is planted yet that TV still only reaches a part of the marketplace. Do you see streaming sports filling that other side of the marketplace? So if you're sitting down with a TV buyer tomorrow, and we're having that conversation, do you think that it's apparent that streaming sports can fill that other 40% of the void that sits out there right now?
Yeah, but as we found, it's a long educational curve to get there.
Yeah.
Because I think what may be missing that makes it a shorter educational curve is tying together some of the benefits of streaming that aren't readily available or readily apparent to the advertiser. For example, if you've been buying TV for as long as you have, you're hitting your reach and frequency targets, everything's fine, and you're out there in your local regional market, and your message is being consumed. If you move that to a streaming world, there's a little bit of a curve on what that means versus a TV commercial versus an impression. So there's a translation layer there. But it's a whole, if you and I are thinking about it, we're thinking about the benefits of rolling in other tactics like display or search or how they interact with video that we're intimately familiar with over years of working in digital.
Yep.
The advertiser, not so much so. And then there's a budget question, and then there's, what does this all mean? It's not difficult for us to put together a vision of what that can look like. Sometimes that lands, sometimes it doesn't. But that's still a learning curve for everybody that they have to get comfortable with.
You brought up something really interesting, and I think it's one of the hardest things to really understand in this transition. And when we're in the marketplace talking to clients, I think it's the element where maybe this conversation gets stuck in mud at times, right? Is that translation layer. You've got a medium on one side, legacy side, that's used to dealing with cost per point structure and program specific conversation, versus to date on the streaming side, we haven't really matured that space to match TV in that way. It's more impression based, as you referenced, right? And it's more one-to-one audience conversation rather than a reach tool, I guess. Where do you see that conversation going in the future? And do you ever see streaming eventually getting into that cost per point conversation? Or do you see legacy media coming forward and operating more on an impression basis?
Well,
very loaded question, I know. But
I'm in marketing because I'm a C student, so it's too mathy for me to go back to a CPM to a CPP.
Yeah.
So I prefer that the CPP comes to CPM, and we just ignore that part. It's
make my lives a little easier, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I would very much appreciate the CPP to CPM conversation rather than, because I've tried to make it the inverse of it, and boy, does that math get squishy real quickly.
But what I will say is I think so I see the challenge with the advertiser conversation being it can be much more. Because it sounds too good to be true.
Yep.
And when I say that, I mean, it's not like, hey, you can do digital advertising and all your problems are solved. It's more that you have a much broader toolkit available to you for maybe the same budget, maybe a little bit more, maybe not, it just depends. But when you are in our world, and I'll say the digital world, where you can combine some of these tactics and see how they work together, it is a different story that, as someone who's done it for so long, you can never take for granted how new it is to somebody else. And so I think that if we can get from a CPP and kind of say, articulate to somebody, you're going to get as many more impressions. The audience is much more, it is your audience and it's much more available to you. And then we can see how search might help at the same time when you're running it. We might see some lift there, but that's a story that, we have to kind of walk somebody through slowly, for them to kind of maybe see the benefit, or I guess slowly to us. We'd like them to just be like, hey, yeah, I see it right away. But
yeah, it's hard to oftentimes get that blank check walking in the door, right? And
yeah,
I think, when I think about from a buyer's perspective, right, and as we've morphed the industry, it feels like we're kind of inching closer to a video solution rather than platform-based solutions, right? And heading that direction. And I think, you touched on it earlier, the RSNs, right? I mean, that's the elephant in the room in the local sports arena right now is sort of the collapse in certain instances or merger opportunities in others of the RSNs. And, when we look at who's the most vulnerable in the space, it is that local client who's relied on the RSN to have access to the Detroit Tigers games or the Pistons or, pick any sports team. Do you see an end in sight for that conversation? Do you see a modified version of the RSN in the future?
Well, let me maybe answer it this way. I never in a million years thought I would be sitting here intrigued, or I should say, as engaged as I am with the palace intrigue between some 1335 local market, Bally or Diamond versus Comcast, what the difference between the A package and the B package is, and how that actually affects potentially our lives.
Right.
So, I think the latest that I've read is, Comcast wants them to be in the digital package.
Yep.
Well, if they're in the digital package, that's, I wouldn't say it's an opportunity for us, but it makes them have to think about what is their advertising strategy, them being Diamond or an RSN, look like in that kind of a tier versus when they had straight broadcast sellers selling TV.
Yeah.
And I think that changing, evolving dynamic is where is what we talk about, and that's what's so interesting to us, because for all the things I was just talking about, there's to be clear, it's less of like the hand-holding process for an advertiser, ultimately benefits us because we're trying to sell them something. It's more like this is really the democratization of a bunch of different digital advertising tried and true tactics that help you and help your business.
Absolutely.
And explaining that to them on the whole is, I think, as exciting as it is maybe, helping an advertiser, working with them and reaching an economic agreement. It's just kind of cool.
You feel like you're on the forefront of something a little bit, right? Or a changing of the guard in the industry. I mean, I think when
that's a good way of putting it.
When Amazon came in and entered into the conversation and made a play for this massive RSN opportunity, right? And we know they're scaling into it slowly. That felt like a very seismic moment in the industry, right? It felt like the first time really in a scalable way, a digital company, because let's not kid ourselves, that's effectively what Amazon is at this point, right? I mean, we know that ads department of Amazon is growing exponentially, right? And they're on the forefront of Thursday Night Football and some other things. I felt like the first time a digital company's really made a scalable entrance into the TV space. And I really am excited to see where this shifts over the next 18 months. I look at all of those RSNs that they now have access into or ownership oversight into. It feels like there's a natural play directly into their DSP or their Fire TV systems. Is that kind of the direction you see it going as well too, or?
Yeah, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the opportunity is in the uncertainty, and the opportunity is also in, not just for us, but all, sort of smaller independent agencies that this is what we've been doing. We've been doing digital advertising. It used to be, I remember when CTV first, years ago, became an acronym, and the pull, I guess the tug of war between the digital buying team or the digital advertising team and the traditional TV buyers, like all of that is here now.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of interesting to watch as a long-term industry veteran.
Yeah.
But it's also, Amazon is a huge company. There's been a long tradition of local advertisers being very successful with local RSNs or regional sports nets, and having that relationship. What does that mean now?
Right.
What how do they translate that to their platform like that, or are they? That's, I guess, the question that is interesting for me to watch, because that's a huge seismic shift, as you mentioned, to sort of, maybe it all stays the same and this isn't but I can't see that happening.
Yeah, I don't see it happening, and it's interesting because if you think about our client base, that's effectively who our client base is, right? Is that local, regional advertiser. And they're the ones I feel like are going to be affected the most by this RSN shift.
Yeah.
They're the ones not playing at the state or national level in direct deals with teams or even the publisher networks at times. And so as you kind of think about, the local client, and you think about TV in general for a local client already, how complicated that is this year. You've got political season coming up. We all know the implications of political in the TV space. Live sports, your access point to that in a lot of markets feels like it's slipping away, right? And we look at it from our client perspective and it feels like we have to provide a solution here. And I think that's why this is of so much importance to us here at Brkthru right now, is because those clients are coming to us and saying, hey, we have these dollars and we have eyeballs that we've always been able to reach. We can't anymore, right? And I think that's what gets me the most excited, is we're able to go out and curate these solutions or build these solutions out. We just sat down and talked about the Disney conversation, right? And I think about what encompasses the Disney conversation. That's also ESPN, right? And that's another access point for our client base. And I know that's a selfish part of this conversation, but that's also the direction this space feels like it's going.
Yeah, it would be beneficial for you to maybe talk about the implications of election season.
Yeah.
Because I think that not everybody may know what that means to you when these buys start coming through, or the buys for the candidates.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talk about video being a singular solution, right? And whether that's on traditional or via streaming, but they don't operate by the same rules, right? In traditional television, you've got this overhang of political, which is an enormous revenue driver for legacy media companies, right? Especially cable companies, the Comcast and the Spectrums of the world. But inside of that world, if you're a local advertiser, non-political, you're subject to what we call preemption, right? And so if you're just, mom and pop's, bait and tackle shop and you're running a media campaign, you're not gonna be able to compete with presidential, congressional, Senate, political runs. And so they have first right to that inventory. They pay for it and they overpay for it. But you're subject to, hey, I laid in this TV schedule and now I have 0 spots being delivered. Whereas on the streaming side, it's the opposite, right?
Yep.
None of those rules apply in the streaming side. So you've got this unique opportunity to maybe enter into a space where you don't have to worry about being preempted. You put $1 in, you get $1 out of it from a value standpoint. And it's something, I think that was a good point. I don't think a lot of folks in the non-traditional media space understand the implications of the political element. And that shift to streaming, it's almost a hedge against that, right? And when you're going into a political space, especially if you're buying live sports, if you're the consumer or a local client, live sports are just as important to you as they are the political client, right? They want to be where the eyeballs are too as well.
Yep.
So you're even more exposed in that instance to political preemption.
And I think that goes to my point about uncertainty. With all this happening in real time, I think it takes up, it's the reason we talk about this so regularly, is there's a lot of keeping up that we have to do,
Right.
given the nature, or given where we're at in the election cycle, also given where we're at with all the stuff happening with the RSNs and the implications they have there. So I think it's a constant question that we're regularly working with, is how do we still get our solution for our clients in that mix?
So you brought up something really interesting, that last part of our conversation around the democratization of TV, I guess, in general, or video in general. To me, I look at this shift in the landscape as a really pivotal moment for local advertisers, because it feels like it really evens that playing field. For the first time on the video screen, we've had that for a while in the traditional digital elements like search and social and display. What are your thoughts on that, right, from a local advertiser perspective in leveling that playing field?
So I'm going to approach that question from the standpoint of specifically what are we talking about?
Yeah.
We're talking about impressions served during a game. We're talking about impressions served during shoulder content, activity in the booth during and after the game, commentary after the game. So obviously, if you put that on a multiple choice question, what's the most valuable? Well, being right in the middle of the game is probably the most valuable to most people. However, your audience is watching all of the above, and maybe watching the post-game, pre-game wrap-up 2 days later.
I think about NBA on TNT.
Yeah.
That's, people tune into that as much as they tune into the game itself, it feels like.
Yeah.
You get on Twitter or X after a game, there's as much conversation around Shaq and Charles Barkley's antics as there are, Joel Embiid going for 35 points.
So I think the opportunity to be in all of those points with a digital buy is exactly what we're talking about, is the democratization piece at a reasonable price point, or one that might make sense for your product or service that you're trying to sell and trying to increase sales of. Why, we talk about it because it's exciting.
Yeah.
You and I have both been in local advertising for over a decade, and see that there's finally that ability to level the playing field.
Right.
Finally, that ability to take the budgets that aren't always huge, that are reasonable for every advertiser, to get in there and get their message out there in ways that maybe didn't always fall into the top of mind premium categories of a year, 2 years, 3 years ago.
Right.
But with live sports and the access now, it does.
That's such a good point. One of the biggest challenges, I think, especially in the local space, at least when I was selling TV, and I know it's even more so now when I talk to friends that still operate in that space, that entry point, right? If you're a local advertiser, you pick up the phone and call your rep at Brkthru. You want to buy, let's say, Sunday Night Baseball on ESPN, or let's say you want to buy an Atlanta Braves schedule for the season. You've got the same access point as any other client has, but if you took that same conversation to a cable company, one, you're going to get put on a waiting list because they've got legacy advertisers that have been doing it for 20 years. And then I feel like every single time there's a sticker shock element that comes with it, right? And you end up having to buy these packaged elements that encompass other products that maybe you're not really, you don't want. They're not part of your plan. They don't fit that brand need. And I look at a local advertiser and I say, hey, this feels like, even all things aside, it feels like a better place to sit on the streaming side with one product than the package side on the cable side. Does that make any sense?
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
And I will give a shameless plug for our own analytics department here, because it's going to take a little bit more in the reading of the data when you're working with multiple tactics. It's not, and I think part of the education curve is to understand what the end result and how the end result, the reporting piece, the effectiveness piece, is packaged up and shared.
Yeah.
And I think we have traditionally seen, or I should say it this way, we have made a concerted effort to make sure that that part of the story is understandable, is accurate, and demonstrates either maybe what was not working with the campaign, or absolutely what was working with the campaign in a manner that's understandable at the end of the day, at the end of the campaign.
Yeah, and I think, as we move forward in the industry, everything is down to reporting now, right? And I think that's such a good point. The reporting that you get on a traditional, I guess, TV schedule comparative to it's night and day, right?
Yeah.
And even with the limitations you have at times inside of CTV or streaming reporting comparative to a report you could generate from a Facebook campaign, for example, it's not quite apples to apples. There are some limitations inside streaming, but it does feel like it's significantly better than what you traditionally see on the legacy media side, where it's just, did it run or did it not?
Well, so that's what I think is always it's exciting to me.
Yeah.
And the challenge is always making it a little bit more understandable to an advertiser or an agency, which is, it's a building block.
Yeah.
It's a building block when you now have the opportunity to be in here, when you now have in here, meaning, on a live sports.
Like
or
a high-value sport.
High-value sport program.
That costs significantly more on the traditional side.
Yep. And then it's, when you're starting maybe to run other tactics and simultaneously with it to enhance the performance of the advertising dollars, or increase the return on ad spend, you want to be able to see what you're getting for that.
Right.
And when you're just looking at demo, or you're just looking at the reporting from a traditional TV station, it's significantly less chunky than when you're, bringing a holistic view of the marketing campaign.
I always think about it too. So the reporting is clearly better, but also the one-to-oneness of streaming versus traditional, right? I mean, I think the biggest challenge I always had with the traditional side solely was around that audience. I mean, there was an audience there, and it's great from a reach vehicle standpoint, but is it the correct audience? Are all the eyeballs watching it? Whereas if streaming, it feels like it's a much more one-to-one conversation, right? Hey, if I'm advertising for BMWs, I'm speaking to BMW buyers or those that look like BMW buyers. On the TV side, you don't know who's on the other side of that screen. And so for me, while it's more cost effective, it's more cost efficient as well compared to maybe a TV buy.
Well, that's why I think I always try to emphasize the other tactics piece.
Yeah.
You can see who your audience is when you can see who's performing the searches or responding to the other metrics. It just gives you a little bit more of a window into, am I reaching the right folks? And you can see that in the performance, you can see that on the website visits or whatever metric the advertiser is looking for to measure their own success. And that's more than you get with TV. And I think that's where this becomes so exciting for you and me, because we've been seeing that happen over the years, that develop more the ability to track some more of that stuff and report out more of it with our own analytics team. Other people have analytics teams, but you can see the story develop more that points to success in the outcome.
Well, and we were talking a little bit off camera before we started, and one of the things that I thought was such a great point you brought up in that conversation was, CTV or streaming with what's underneath it, right? And when you did it, it was kind of funny because all I thought immediately was, well, that's a funnel, right? And you kind of start at the top with streaming, and it's almost regenerative in the way because you can look at the bottom and see what actionable keywords are being utilized.
I'm a C student. Regenerative is too many syllables.
I know. Wait, listen. I heard that last week. We had a lot of big words last week, so I'm threading them into this conversation. Wait till you hear some of the other ones. 3 syllables is the most I got for you, though. So
Good.
If you go 4, I'm going to get lost. But yes, it can regenerate back to the top. So we can take those keyword elements, those display pieces, those targeting segments, and it can speak to the top of that funnel, and it becomes it informs itself what's working and what's not. And I thought it was such a great way that you put it, because I hadn't really ever thought about it from that perspective. I mean, we talk about the funnel and how it can inform each other, but then the more you break it down, the more you realize it's the whole cycle inside of that, and it starts at the top with that streaming piece.
Yep.
And the impact of sports is so much more significant. It really, I think, accentuates that campaign.
Well, it just, we may have said it here already, but, going back to where this conversation started months ago, premium content, I think if you asked any CMO or any people that we talk to in market, and, for years that's been, maybe I want to be on Fox News, or I want to be on NBC, or I want to be on something that everyone just kind of associates with, a website or a property that everybody's heard of.
Yeah.
No one has said I want to be on NFL.
Yeah.
No one was really saying I want to be on the MLB Tigers versus Rangers game.
Right.
And so it's not been until I think the writer's strike where that really got pulled up to the fore, and it was so apparent that that's all that's left for us to watch.
All that's left, yeah.
And boy, don't we love to watch it.
Well, part of me wonders too, did it just remove the fluff of what we thought people were watching, right? Because the reality of it is if you go back even before the writer's strike, eyeballs were already gravitating towards sports.
No, yeah.
But there was so much noise in that system. There's so many extra shows. I mean, we talk about a fragmented world. Just talk about the video screen in itself. I mean, how many of us sit around and spend more time trying to figure out what app to select videos from to watch than we do actually watching the content itself? I'll watch a 30-minute show that took me 45 minutes to find at times. There's so much content out there.
Well, I think what's a little bit inside baseball about this whole conversation is you've got Adam Silver saying to the teams, think about your own apps.
Yep.
That's a legitimate conversation that's happening. Well, then that's no longer, there's no TV seller that's going to sell advertising into the Phoenix Suns app.
Yeah.
But they're going to eventually want to have advertising. They're going to need to support it somehow. It's how it always goes, or let's just make the assumption that's how it always goes. And then what are you left with? You're left with the need for a strategy to get those advertisers on board. If not, it at least has to be part of our conversation about how do we accommodate that.
And
How can we accommodate that?
and in an even more fragmented system at that point, because now you're starting to introduce apps and other, we've seen teams like the Clippers, the Suns, and others have already come out with apps. And but Matt Ishbia, who bought the Phoenix Suns, Detroit guy, one of the first declarations he made when he bought the team is, we're done with the RSN. We're taking all of our stuff to broadcast to increase our reach, and we're going to double down on the streaming side. We're going to create our own app that allows for our games to be broadcast. To me, that gives enormous control to the team and wrestles it away from the legacy media consumers. That feels like a benefit to the end clients now, especially our types of clients. It democratizes that piece and gives you an access point that never existed before, to be directly involved with these sports teams.
And I think having just, like I said, you have to make the assumption that eventually advertising is going to find its way into that model.
Yeah.
That's just from sitting in this world for.
Well, we saw it with Netflix. Right?
We saw it with Netflix. Like you can say you don't want it, but it's hard to withstand the magnetism of it. It's a business model, and it's been effective. I think that's that more than. You have to always think about that dynamic that's happening inside all the leagues all around.
Right.
When you think to add to that conversation of why is sports such a dynamic, popular, premium viewing thing, because that's actually happening.
And that kind of goes into one of the next points that we were discussing is, it's not. You look at who's buying the rights over the last couple of let's call it last 2 years. And right now we're in the middle of, we talked about NBA on TNT, right? Those NBA rights are up for conversation right now, up for bid. And you look at the players, there's kind of the TNT, TBS group, and then it's all Amazon and Apple into that conversation now. You think about MLS and MLB, Thursday Night Football sits with Amazon now. All of these seem to be shifting into these tech companies more so than these legacy companies. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of think it speaks to what you just talked about, right? Of we're entering into this shift in landscape, and there's new powers in control of that. We're going to see, I think, more shift in how you access sports and how it fits into your marketing funnel over the next 18 months than we probably have in the last 25 years.
Well, I think the piece of that I always kind of remind myself is, I don't know the number, someone's got the statistic for how much local advertisers have been spending on RSNs, because the presumption is you could make the case, well, they're just going to get left out.
Right.
But I can't see that happening. No. I don't see that the way it's going. So there's going to have to be some mechanism, some distribution point that allows local advertisers to still get that.
Right.
Now, to take that one step further, what I would posit is digital advertising is kind of complicated. At this point, there's uncertainty, and why we talk about this a lot is it opens up a lot of opportunity for people who have been doing it a long time, especially for people who've been doing it focused on regional and local advertisers for a long time, like we have. So it's not necessarily a sales pitch, but it is like, someone's going to have to help you negotiate this if you're an advertiser, and someone's going to have to be sort of large enough to be able to talk to the tech companies and say, hey, how are you going to facilitate this, or at least be on the lookout for the signals that they start putting out into the market about what their strategy is ultimately going to be.
Well, I think that maybe that's kind of where I was going with that too, is you look at the space, and this is less to do with the advertising, but more the access points as the consumer. And I read on the flight up here, in order to watch all the NFL games this year, you have to have subscriptions to 7 different services.
Yeah.
So that makes it complicated as a consumer, but just as complicated as an advertiser on the other side, right? And I think that's, when we talk about fragmentation, we've seen fragmentation as far as time spent, consumer attention, but we haven't seen, I think, that same level of fragmentation on the back end from the advertiser perspective. And when we look at sports specifically moving forward, if you want to be attached to all the NFL games or an NBA or MLB, you have to have a multitude of different services that you're working alongside. That's going to overcomplicate that process for the local advertiser by and large, and even the agency side, right? Do you ever see that shifting back to more of a singular point, or do you think we're kind of going to stay in this fragmented lane? And
No, not for a long time. I mean, it's a feeding frenzy, right? You have all sorts of. I mean, if you really want to talk about palace intrigue, who is getting the NBA rights?
Yeah.
That's up right now. There's multiple packages being offered. There's now multiple bidders. It might not be TNT. It might be.
Yeah.
But the cost is going up, and the tech companies are coming in, and sometimes they just can kind of come in to. It almost feels like just to mess with people.
Make it more
and the leagues, the other side of this is the leagues want their content or their product is wherever they can get it.
Yeah.
So you see Netflix getting Christmas Day football games.
Yeah.
So I don't see it settling to a point where, okay, my Monday Night Football is on ABC and my NFC is on CBS.
Yeah.
Is that right? Or Fox? I can't remember.
Both. That's
Yeah.
the problem.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
There you go.
Therein lies the crux of the issue. You said it earlier. Like, our world feels like it doesn't feel complex, but it's extremely complex on the back end, right? And I think, again, not to make this a sale or a conversation or a pitch about Brkthru, but that's kind of our superpower, right? Is our ability to stitch together so many of these platforms, right? And I think one of the reasons that I was so excited about this is not because it's sports and I like sports, not because it's TV and I like TV. Where sports streaming is going, it's kind of what we already do with so much of our other business, right?
Right.
And so for me, it's gosh, we're at the forefront of this, and we're built for this conversation, right? We're built for this concept, being able to take this to our clients.
Well, I think that is, so I won't say it falls into a sales pitch, but it's what we do all the time, and I think it is exciting for us to be able to talk about to our clients, because that's what we like to do.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I'm extremely excited about the direction this heads. I think it's a net benefit to our clients, which is probably why we're so heavily invested into this idea and really trying to build this thing together, right? And bring this to the local marketplace and to our clients and give them that same access point as everybody else.
Well, for the first podcast, I think it's one of the topics that is happening all around us that, we're excited by it just from our own interest in sports and the industry, but also I think is a good jumping off point to start conversations with our clients and help them understand what we see, and sort of simplify the landscape and all the machinations of what's going on in the sports and broadcast and advertising world for local agencies and advertisers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And really appreciate everybody that took time to connect with us, watch the video. Hopefully you got some great dialogue on it. A lot more to come from us over here at Brkthru. Kick it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Jonathan and Nathan. If you'd like to talk more about how you can take advantage of the opportunities in streaming sports, reach out to us, info@brkthru.com. Visit our website blog for upcoming podcasts where we'll be covering subjects such as Pride 2024 and why your support of the powerful LGBTQ plus community should be more than just a 1-month effort during the month of June. How you can reach B2B audiences with digital media, and in this ever-increasingly heated political year, the impacts and opportunities for candidates, issues, and other advertisers. Thank you for tuning in.